Welcome to the Shit Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
And today in the middle, you have me, Richard Busolato.
And my name is Joe Augustine. Welcome to the Shit Show. And today's theme is control or collaboration, extraction or regeneration. The show is a show that is trying to make sense of the polycrisis, or as you'll learn another term today, the meta-crisis. And we are always in search of new perspectives and experts, if we can, in the field. So today our guest is someone I think who fits the bill. His name is Michael Haupt, and he is a very special guest, the creator of Nexus 2030. Michael has more than 4 decades of experience analyzing complex systems, and he has a passion to help you see the bigger picture so that you can help make sense of accelerating complexity and make better decisions as well. That's the top of the icing on the cake, the top of the iceberg introduction. Michael, would you like to share a little bit more about your career?
Good morning and good afternoon. And firstly, congratulations on your first show. And I'm delighted to be your first guest. So I listened to your previous show and I got a very good sense of where you're going. I think you're going to make some waves. So I'm very honored to be here. A little bit about myself. I've had 2 very different careers. The first was in technology. And that career it was a corporate career, took me to 16 cities on 6 continents. I lived in each of those cities, implementing high-end computer systems. But the main thing that came out of that experience was seeing how a system can create huge transitions within the people involved. So it's usually staff. Those are the first people that are affected. And secondly, customers. It was all in the telephony space. So what I learned most from that experience is navigating through fairly significant transitions and taking large teams of people along with you for the journey. Then I had a major life change in 2004, and that resulted in a career in the systemic change space. So for the last decade or more, I've been advising think tanks, research organizations, municipalities, grassroots groups about trying to answer the question, this system that causes the individual challenges in society, can anything be done about the system? I've met incredible people, built an incredible international network. I've seen just about every systemic approach on the planet. And then when COVID hit, I walked away from the space, basically burnt out because there's a huge amount of talk, and nothing changes. So hopefully that's a good enough setting the scene for where we're at.
Right.
Interesting.
In other words, and with due respect to my fellow presenters as well, I think Michael's the most qualified person on the show today.
I refuse to accept the title of expert in any way.
Richard's pretty experienced. I think
which is why I preambled it with a due apology. And I speak facetiously. I mean, we're all experts in our field, but I think the attention that Michael's been paying to things is what we're very curious about today. And I think what's really interesting is this idea that for all the stuff that's happening, for all the complexity, there is perhaps a series of prisms or lenses that we can look through and filters that can actually help us understand that, oh, okay, so this is what's happening. This is the simple thing that's behind it all. I'm a big fan of systems. I mean, it's completely what I believe. I tried to do this. I tried to implement it in the house, in the home. But as you well know, doesn't always work.
Everyone in my house follows my systems, trust me. Because it's about efficiency, right? No, what I'm looking forward to the most about today is people are so overwhelmed by this. And the only way to look at it is to take that huge step back and look at it from a systems perspective, right? And we all know that. People are stuck in these details, and that's not where we need to focus. We need to be doing the step back. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. And it's actually quite elegant and simple when you do that. It's not complex. Is the change complex? Sure. But the problem is actually quite simple and elegant when you step back. So that's why I'm excited about today.
Completely agree with your analysis.
Sorry about that, but if I may be systematic about this as well, is at this point, I'd like to please ask you to subscribe, do the things you have to do to remember what this channel is about. And then if at the end of it all, you think, you know what, That's not what I wanted. You can take it away then. Okay. And tell your friends about this. Okay. Sorry, Michael, I interrupted you.
I just wanted to agree with Andrea, great analysis. However, there are pros and cons. So what you were talking about is the filter through which you view the world. So this is a very large, high level, 50,000 foot view of what's going on. The disadvantage of the high level is that I'm personally unable to intelligently engage at very low levels. So there may well be some conversations in this time that we spent together where I'm just going to say, whoa, that's way over my head. So, I don't think it's possible to keep both views, the very high level as well as the nitty gritty, very detailed level. So to help me do that and to counter the fact that I'm getting old and my memory's fading, I've created a huge research database where all the nitty gritty detail exists. So I may not be able to do it on this call, but I can usually very quickly dive to the correct place and find the nitty gritty and share it with, when a question comes up or so on. So that's been a lifesaver for me. A second brain, they call it developing a second brain. Here's the place where I just store the nitty gritties. I can maintain focus on the high level. But the other reason I mention that is because there may be listeners to the call who love diving into the weeds of a particular matter. And they may get a little frustrated with this call because we may not get into the detail of the weeds.
Yeah, it's funny. I had an epiphany just in the last 24 hours. So, there's certain, I noticed Nate Hagens is someone that you've put in some of your research. So he's someone I listen to whenever I can. And often you'll see in the comments, it's too high level for me. I don't understand it. And for someone like Nate, it must be kind of frustrating because the people who love him want to be communicated to at that level. And there's other people who find that out of their reach. But what we really need to be sort of developing is a communication ripple effect, right? Where, so when I communicate, I'm trying to talk to my mum. That's sort of my mindset, the words I use. And even then my mum is a very smart lady, right? But even then, probably like Joe picks me up sometimes when I'll use a phrase that people won't necessarily intuitively understand like I will, which is great. So I think, what we need to do is build a sort of a communication ecosystem where someone who listens at Nate's feet takes that and then communicates it in their own way to their audience in a way that they understand, rather than just having single sources. We need multiple sort of ripples. And it's part of the challenge that we've got is people don't want to speak up because, there's not enough people speaking up. Well, the more people speak up, the more people speak up. So I think, if you find someone who's too overwhelming for you and too technical, if you listen to the climate scientists or the physicists, they use measurements I don't understand. I still listen to them, but who's interpreting that in your language? And the other challenge we have with this is the people who are interpreting are being attacked for not being experts, and they're being attacked by people within the movement, right? So we need to stop attacking people who are trying their best to communicate it. So that's just an epiphany I've had. I need to come up with a brand for this so that we can start pushing it as a movement. Anyway, there's my epiphany. Right, let's move on.
To add to that, if I may, so I think we're going to get to the point where there's a new language. We've got some phrases right now that are insufficient in explaining where the world is going to. So you're going to get new words coming up, and I think you'll eventually get new grammar, new ways of expressing what's unfolding. Our language, when I say language, English specifically, some of the West Eastern languages are more rich because they come from a pictorial background. But the Western language is very limited in expressing some of the concepts we're trying to deal with now.
Yeah. So we've got Julian and Michael saying hi to Michael. Popped up.
Hello, guys. Good to see you.
All right. So we're going to start where we usually start. And that's what's the biggest story that you got your attention this week. We're going to keep around for later. So anything other than that, what's grabbing your attention? Crazy stories, obvious stories. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'm always happy to shoot the boat out with the World Bank downgrading effectively the economic outlook for this decade based on the start we've had. And you have to go back quite a long way to find a decade with worse economic outlook than they're picturing at the moment.
But we're gonna talk about that sort of in the news bit of the show, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But
But
go into more details.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm.
But it certainly grabbed me.
Yeah.
Well, also coming up again with more details later on today is that big acquisition that Meta just made in Scale AI.
Yeah.
It's no longer a thing where an accidental outcome is going to be super intelligence. This is the stated goal of this particular project. And the kind of data and kind of tagging it's set out to do. That's the huge implication there. So most times I've been pretty enthusiastic about AI and thinking this could be great. It's all going in the right direction, whatever, and all that. But this particular play got it really close to the edge for me, and I felt it's a little heavy that this particular strike, the way it's been set out and its stated objective. It's kind of shocking, actually.
Okay, I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about that, Michael. What do you think grabbed your attention?
I'm going to be
that's not going to be discussed later.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm going to be a little controversial and say that whenever there's a major thing unfolding on the news, I'm reminded of a 1997 movie called Wag the Dog. And my immediate question is, what is this thing drawing my attention away from? So I don't follow any of the major things that happen on the news unless they personally affect me or my family. So I don't have anything to add to this part of the conversation.
No, fair enough. Okay. So obviously we had the...
I want to add one thing to Joe and AI, which actually struck me yesterday morning. It was a really tiny little article in the Swedish Daily I write. And it was an interview with a fighter pilot, ex-fighter pilot that's now a developer for Saab, who makes these, 6th generation fighter jets. And he said, we have simulated and I have been in the air against the AI. And we'll come to the point when it's 50-50 in an air battle. Right. And I don't think I will win for very much longer. That's how quick the evolution is.
Yeah, that's an interesting, like if you just got machines fighting machines, what's the ultimate outcome of war? Yeah. Interesting. All right. So we saw the Air India plane go down yesterday. So it's the first time a 787-8, in this case, Boeing aircraft went down in an accident. There was an incredible story about one guy that got thrown and survived. Seat 11A, by the way. Yeah. There's a lot of people talking about the reasons for it, and there's a lot of people disagreeing with each other, experts. So I definitely recommend hang tight. We will find out what happened. The temperature came up as a possible contributor. So it was basically close to 40 degrees Celsius. So if that's a factor, that's kind of that's a change, right? But the one thing I would just say is it's terribly sad. And if you've ever been to India and you sit at the airport, you can see how close people live to the airports. So most major cities, it's a long way to the residential block. And it's usually the slums, but in this case, it was a doctor's hostel. So they really have no idea how many people have died. Obviously, the LA riots, so the whole shenanigans around that, from Trump bringing in the National Guard. The lawyers have basically said it's illegal. They're fighting it. We've got Trump's big parade tomorrow. But there's one US story that might not have gotten everyone's attention. So Tulsi Gabbard is possibly one of the most interesting and least sort of public figures. She's in the public, but not like all the other ones. So she's the US Director of National Intelligence. And she released a video on June the 11th. And this was after a visit to Hiroshima, warning that the world is closer to nuclear war than ever. Now, we all know that. This is not new information. But what I found really interesting about it is this comment. As we stand here today, closer to the brink of nuclear annihilation than ever before, political elite and warmongers are carelessly fomenting fear and tensions between nuclear powers. And it's the political elite bit that gets me, right? So Donald Trump's in his second term. Isn't he the political elite? Like, at what point do they actually, like all of this deep state? Aren't they the deep state? I mean, they've been there for a while, right? I don't know. It's a very strange. I don't disagree with the sentiment of the message, the warning of, the only reason we haven't gone nuclear before is because it was demonstrated and shown how bad it was. I know, Richard, you've been living in Europe. You would have grown up in those times.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It definitely felt very strange. It's gotten on the Fox News network. It's like, yay, brilliant, awesome. And then on the left-leaning, it's more like, what the fuck? So it's had complete opposite reactions. I don't know. Did you guys have a look at it?
Yes.
Well, I saw the story, and I've always been saying that real change is going to happen when the artists step up and help.
Yeah.
This wasn't the example I was looking for. It is sort of what I'm talking about, because the visualization and to help people kind of imagine what was happening, that was that part of it, I think, was really good. But yeah, this whole politicization of this, it's inherently political, yes, but the shoehorn the us and them in the middle of all of it, is the part that is weird. But I do very much agree with it. It is a play. We're really right on the edge right now. Everyone's got a motive. And the moment something leaves the ground and it's heading to somewhere else in your airspace, you're not too sure what it is. That could trigger the whole thing.
It could be an AI fighter pilot.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are many excellent points made there, and I'm a believer in huge rationality in mankind. So for me, a nuclear showdown is really, really remote in my thinking, because it ain't good for anyone involved. However, and this is the caveat you have to throw into the ring, when you start unleashing really powerful emotions around subjects, and there are many of these in the world at the moment, and the ones that probably comes mostly to my mind is India and Pakistan. And I know, and I'm a good friend with people from both countries. And this is an issue you basically cannot discuss. It's just a red flag coming down for people. And there are similar arguments to be made around Ukraine and Russia. That's a very, very infected and long history. And then you have sort of, maybe not quite at that level, but it's pretty clear for China that if we were ever in the Western world to push Taiwan into a situation of full independence, that would be a line in the sand. And there, all of a sudden, you can throw some of the rationality out the window. Because now it becomes emotional.
It's not the geopolitical or political divisions that alarm me. Or concern me about whether or not we could ever go nuclear. It's the end of timers. They're the ones who I think are completely irrational. And the whole Christian nationalism, far right movement in the US is based on end of times thinking. It's all over the world. I mean, it's a huge movement, and been a lot of political sort of access in that movement. So they're the ones that kind of worry me.
I think it's on a similar argument, because it becomes emotional and not rational anymore.
Yeah. Michael?
If I may pick up on one point you made, because you were questioning, well, the political elite, is Trump not part of the political elite? In my view, and we'll get into this deeper when we go into the mind map, there is a distinct difference between the political elite, which is the old school people that have for the past 100 years been pushing towards global governance, which is outside of the Trump administration, and the wealthy elite, which is the top 0.001% of people that have surrounded or been drawn into Trump's gravitational field. And I think that's what she was referring to. It's the old school, which we typically refer to as deep state, and these guys, which represent an entirely new class. I can go into that in a little more detail, but I'd like the mind map just as some context.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, shall we begin and hand the floor to Michael? So I discovered Michael on LinkedIn. He wrote a blog, I think it was before Easter. I think it was called The Butterfly Revolution. Is that no? The Butterfly Effect was one of the two, because the Butterfly Revolution, I think, is Curtis Yarvin's philosophy, so it's not that one. And then you had a bit of a spiritual sort of experience over the Easter break, which you may or may not want to talk about. And now this Nexus to 2030 is your big focus. So I'll hand it over to you, and you can tell us what it's about and where it all came from. Or tell us your journey first.
Yes, thank you for that. So we're going to look at a mind map. If I can get the sharing screen, or if Andrea can get the file up. Two major things led to the development of this mind map. And just a reminder, we're looking at a very high level view of what's unfolding. But there is a place on the mind map where any world event can easily be slotted in. So that was the attempt that I was trying to do, is, with all these random things going on, can I create some kind of pattern? I'm a strategic foresight practitioner, which means you're looking for patterns, and the patterns allow you to extrapolate and explain what's coming next. So that was the reason for the map coming together. Two important things from a spiritual perspective, if I may, and before I mention them, just to add that this is not a woo-woo process. So the first happened in 2004. I had an out-of-body experience on a beach in Thailand, completely unexpected. There was no substance involved. I wasn't going on any kind of spiritual quest. So it was like the universe just hitting me on the side of the head, saying, time for a wake-up call. And that resulted in a 2-year sabbatical, during which I dived deep into the world of consciousness research, discovered a whole world I had no idea existed. I was a left brain technologist, used to coding and very predictable outcomes. And here was something I'd never heard of before. So, I've read, literally hundreds of books in the consciousness research space, and that's heavily influenced my thinking over decades now. And then over Easter weekend this year, maybe one thing I should mention around that out-of-body experience, I now take these experiences very seriously. I've met many others who've had similar experiences, and I no longer question the fact that there is a realm to reality that is beyond just the physical side of what we can see. Now, how you define that and describe it, there's lots of contradictions amongst people who spend their entire life studying this. So we're not going to try and get to a definitive answer on this, but let's just, for the purposes of this conversation, accept that there is something going on that's beyond science as we currently understand it, beyond the physical reality that we experience on a day-to-day basis. What I think I do differently compared to people who receive these downloads is, because I'm a left brain pragmatist, I take them very seriously, and I document and research and go and find out as much as I can about the message that is sent. Hence the 3,000 research paper database that I've collated. And what I'm trying to do, so what happened in 2004, very clear vision of what was coming. Most of it made no sense to me. I'll give you one example. This was 2004, 5 years before Bitcoin emerged. But in the vision was a very clear thing, which consisted of a currency issued by people rather than currencies issued by banks. But 5 years before Bitcoin made absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. So what that vision became was instead a map. I would concentrate on developments that happened internationally that answered a piece of the puzzle that made no sense at the time it arrived, and slowly building out that puzzle so that I can see this stuff is real. I don't know where it comes from, but it's real. And so it should be taken seriously. And I think if more people who have these experiences took it seriously, perhaps the world would be in a very different place. So what happened over the Easter weekend, I was in a bit of a low space, and I went into the weekend very intentionally holding a meditative question, which is, considering that Easter is symbolic of death and rebirth, what is it in me that needs to die to make space for new either belief systems or ideas or something to emerge? And I wasn't quite prepared for the experience, because another very clear vision came, again, with many things that don't make sense to me at the moment. But the mind map is a distillation of those two fairly significant experiences. So there is an element of woo-woo, but I want to stress that this is all backed by science, and all of the research is there. We won't, in a short call like this, we won't have time to go into it, but in the mind map, which you can download at 2030.michaelhaupt.com, there are all the links to the research database to back up what I'm going to say. If I may add one other quick thing in as well, is the very crucial role that my daughter plays. So I'm a solo dad to a daughter who will turn 21 years old in 2035. There's a whole story about how she came into my life, but basically through 2 marriages, I avoided children because my worldview, whether it's right or wrong, is that the world's a messed up place. And if that's true, why would you want to bring a child into it? Anyhow, the universe again insisted that I have to have a child. And so she's turned my worldview from, well, look at what's wrong with the world, to, okay, now you've got to be responsible for it. What are you going to do about it? What can you do to create a new way of living on the planet? So she drives everything I do. And I mention her because I have skin in the game. So I take this stuff incredibly seriously. It's her future that I'm most concerned about, and everything that I do is for her, because many of the changes that we're going to talk about happening, that I think are happening, I may not be alive to experience them, but she will. And so I just wanted to mention that this is not conspiracy theory stuff. There is a little bit of conspiracy involved in it, but again, the public policy papers that back up what I say is there. The research papers are there. Let me take a breath there and just check and see, are we still on track?
We're on track. Absolutely.
And I'm always happy with some woo-woo, so don't worry. I think it's well, guys, if you're not exploring both sides, the
Right.
left brain and the right brain, I think you're missing, and I think we need to be the bridges in between that can communicate to both sides as well. So I think there's
Great. So I'm going to attempt to share, and let's see if it works.
I can do it. I can do it if you want.
No, it's not allowing me to do that.
There it is.
Oh, great. You've got it up.
Yep.
Okay. So when you look at this online, it doesn't unpack the entire map like that. It ends up just with the major blocks on it. So on the right-hand side is all of the metaphysical stuff. This is the more, less than obvious physical things that we see in the world. And the left-hand side is all the physical stuff. So if I may start on the right-hand side, just to give some context. So I speak about our operating system, and here I'm talking about tens, even hundreds of thousands of years. What is the operating system that has driven human progress? And again, at this very high level, what I'm most interested in is the collective use or putting to work, as it were, human ingenuity and creativity. So this is at the species level rather than individually what happens in each country. And I'm concerned that right now, the way human ingenuity and creativity is being put to use is not the best. Let's think about the space race. There were entire nations that got behind an incredibly powerful vision and a purpose, and everybody was aligned. We don't have that vision. We're kind of all drifting around saying, oh my goodness, the sky is falling, but there's no real effective direction in which we're all heading at the species level. So the beauty of good and evil, and what I'm doing here is just quickly going through at a high level what each of these nodes represent, but there's layers of it. So think of it like an onion, lots of layers, and you can dive into whatever level you're most comfortable with. The beauty of good and evil, I had to answer the question for myself, how do we justify things like world wars or any major incident that results in high numbers of death? Because although those horrific things happen, generally speaking, the arc of human progress is still improving, generally speaking. I know you can point to many exceptions, but generally speaking, we've pulled huge numbers of people out of poverty, or rather higher up Maslow's hierarchy of existence. And how do you account for these horrible events that happen? So to address that, I came across Hegelian dialectics, which proposes that there's normally a thesis, which is an idea, a worldview, a paradigm, and up comes an antithesis, antithesis, and those two are usually diametrically opposed to each other, and so they clash somewhere. Both thesis and antithesis have some kind of internal contradiction within them, which means they're bound to fail. And in the failure of both thesis and antithesis, out pops synthesis, which takes elements from both thesis and antithesis, but adds its own unique blend, and something new comes up. So what both world wars created for us was incredible level. This is the good, ignoring the thesis, which was why the wars happened in the first place. But the synthesis that came out of that was incredibly high levels of coordination and cooperation. War is, from a logistics perspective, helps us understand how to move people and material and all the rest around. And that eventually led to globalization. So our current global supply chains, many of what enables those supply chains came from lessons that we learned during First World War and Second World War. So the beauty of good and evil is the thesis clashes with antithesis, something pops out as synthesis, and that's what the beauty of good and evil is all about. So if you look at our progress, we've generally improved all the way along. Now, within that, we've got our own personal freedom. This answers the question about whether whether everything is preordained or whether we have personal choice in that. So I believe we've got guardrails, and I refer to this as the evolutionary impulse. So the evolutionary impulse that has been with us for 3.8 billion years, which has driven progress from single-celled creatures all the way to human life. The evolutionary impulse is the innate organizing principle, the drive within living systems to constantly achieve higher expressions of themselves. And those are the boundaries. So we have personal choice within those boundaries as long as we're accomplishing a higher expression of the living system within which we're operating. And that addresses for me the personal freedom bit. If I drop down now to consciousness, so the program and the book and the mind map and all the rest is called Nexus 2030 because you've got so many converging things happening at the same time. Mm-hmm. And in the metaphysical space, we're having a shift in consciousness. So in the detail, I look at 4 different, they called major evolutionary transitions, and this is in the scientific research. The most recent started with the Neolithic revolution or the agricultural revolution about 12,000 years ago. And that's material consciousness. And we've been in material consciousness all along for the past 12,000 years. What that has resulted in is domination over the physical resources that the planet represents. It's also resulted in significant growth. So again, looking at Maslow's hierarchy, 8 billion people are now no longer in purely the subsistence layer of that pyramid, but they're higher up, which means that as a species, we can afford to have these kind of conversations. Where is the world going? What's our purpose? Why are we here? What is our calling? All of those bigger questions, which you can't address when you're down at the lower levels of existence. But the point of material consciousness is that it appears we're now approaching the 5th major evolutionary transition. I'm calling it mycelial consciousness to represent the underground root system that keeps the natural world communicating with each other in a way that's far more effective than our internet is. And the emergence of that mycelial form of consciousness started perhaps in the 1960s with hippie movements and so on, but it's matured significantly, and we'll talk a little bit about why I say that and what the maturation process is. Some people call it planetary consciousness, Gaia consciousness. There's various words for it, but it's reflecting a new way of thinking about how we coordinate our activities with each other and how we think, basically. At the beginning of the call, we spoke about having a new language. It's referring to this mycelial consciousness. How do we even communicate these ideas when we've been so used to thinking in a material form of consciousness? Let me stop there before I go on. Everything's still making sense?
Yep,
totally.
Fabulous.
Yeah, I think I should bring the rest of the people who are maybe not watching on online, listening in right now. It's been quite a stack to kind of unravel. I think it bears some explanation about what the mycelial thing is about as well, because it's not just some sort of an idea that hasn't been shown to work at all. It actually is something that the plant world uses, and if you've I don't know if you've heard, just for everybody else, right, about how mushrooms or that part of the world, they communicate. The plants communicate with that kind of network, and that kind of it's almost a consciousness at a different level, and it's also, of course, I think used a quite nice effect in The Last of Us, where it poses a whole different kind of problem. But I just thought I'd bring everybody in on that as well, so because it's been deep. I'm not gonna lie.
Thank you for that context setting, Joe. And for those who can access the map online, 2030.michaelhaupt.com, under mycelial consciousness, there's probably 500 different examples of how this works. One that I'm particularly inspired by is the wood wide web, which is what Joe was just referring to, how plants communicate with each other. But I mean, there's incredible stuff there. We don't have time to go into it, but it's there. Really profound stuff, so profound and overwhelming that to me it can't even be questioned. But because it's new, for those of us who haven't come across it, immediately your filters go up and say, no, I haven't heard about this before, so it must be nonsense. But the evidence is quite overwhelming. Fabulous. Let's move on quickly to the next one, which is in the top left-hand corner, which is the repeating pattern from empire to planetary. Now, this essentially talks about the rise and fall of civilizations, but we're talking here from a pattern perspective. So there have been 26 well-documented civilizations, all of them showing a very similar cycle as they go from rising, reaching their peak, and then declining. And as a meta-study of all of those, they've identified 7 significant phases. So, from early growth, again, getting to peak and then slowly declining. The real point of all of that bit is that the global civilization, if we take a start date of 1648, which is the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the pretty tumultuous period after the Byzantine Empire collapsed. So if we take that period as the start of this, we're about 377 years into that process. The important bit here is that this is the first time it's a globalized empire, meaning the Western way of doing stuff. So we don't really have an empire. The US has refused to take that label. But generally speaking, the neoliberal way of living can be seen as a globalized empire. And what I've done is map out those 7 phases with very specific dates. It may be different for each country, but generally speaking, we can fairly accurately map out those 7 phases. The point of all of that is that we are nearing the end of that cycle. The cycle typically lasts between 250 and 500 years. We're 377 years into it. But the length is not that important. It's more looking for the signs that show you that the empire is in decline. And we'll get into a little bit in the bottom left-hand corner that shows you we're very close to the end. The good news of these cycles is that something new always emerges. So the end of an empire doesn't mean human extinction. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this call. But it means that there's an end of the old way, the normal, whatever we were used to doing in the past, that changes significantly and something new emerges. So it's not necessarily something to be fearful of. It's more something to be aware of and then make a conscious choice. Do I focus on the things that are ending, or do I look for the weak signals of what's emerging? For me, it's much more inspiring to look for the weak signals that are emerging and specifically point my daughter in that direction.
Okay, so just so we understand this as well, you are drawing this conclusion based on the previous cycles as well. What's another cycle that we can sort of like plug into and understand? Because otherwise we only have the example of this one. What was the previous cycle about? The previous empirical cycle.
The previous empirical cycle was the Roman Empire, so that was the one that collapsed just prior to this. And again, I don't have the dates of the phases and all the rest with me right here, but in the research database, there's a huge amount of this. And basically, the 26 civilizations that have been discovered, these are I beg your pardon, documented. These are highly educated individuals, either historians or archaeologists, or they dedicated their entire life to go and writing a book on that one specific civilization. And then there've been a few people who've taken the books themselves and said, what patterns can we extrapolate from this? So again, in the mind map, there's a particular book that I highly recommend, William Oppol's, and I've just gone blank on the title, but that's a fairly short book, and it was the most powerful that I read, because he melded together these patterns in a way that finally the penny dropped for me, where we could say, okay, these patterns are incontrovertible, and therefore it means we can apply it to our global civilization. So there's a huge amount to research and dive into there if you're interested in it. Jeffrey West's book Scale certainly touches on this as well. But William Oppol's book gave the much better, in my view, meta pattern. He drew some pretty profound conclusions, which I think he made quite a leap in. But because I'd read all the other books, I could completely see where he was going. Very short book. Scale is quite a lengthy book. William Oppol's, to me, really summarized and made it as distinct as possible. But Jeffrey West's book is also very good.
So based on the echoes of the past, technically, it's all downhill from here, right? I mean,
well, it depends on where you choose to focus. So the ending of the normal, yes, is very much all downhill. And you'll find, so a lot of my experience in the corporate space, and more specifically working with an accounting firm for a year, trying to look at ESG and different ways of doing it, we tend to get so caught up in the way and so stuck in a rut, basically. So corporates, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the work in the ESG space, they're completely focused not so much on addressing the issues that we can see, but in just achieving compliance.
Yeah.
And this came out after a year of really trying to do some creative stuff, where generally everybody was agreeing, yes, we need to do this no-brainer stuff, but they couldn't get boards and so on to agree, which just shows that once we set in place a particular system within society, it's very difficult to break out of it. And the being trapped in that system is the bit that has the built-in ending of that system somehow built into it. So my view now is, having spent a decade in the systems change space, there's very little that we can do to change the system. We should rather look at what's emerging and amplify those signals and say, what are the bridges that we can build from old to new? That's generally my mind view from this. So the interesting thing about this whole empire rise and fall thing is that every single one of those 26 civilizations were class-based, which means that you inevitably get the elites, the 1%, a group of people that believe they are ordained in some way. They're more special than the rest of the people. And so from history, it looks like every class-based civilization will eventually collapse under its own weight. Now, the alternative to a class-based is a values-based civilization. And the examples that we have as far as values-based societies, civilizations are concerned, are any of the long-standing indigenous tribes. So in Australia, it's the Aboriginals. In South Africa, it's the Khoisan. North America, the North American Indians. These were values-based civilizations that don't have a hierarchy. They don't have somebody, that eventually ends up at the top of the pyramid. So my point of all of this is that as this empire ends, we are standing at a choice point of either repeating another class-based civilization, or because our consciousness has developed sufficiently, we have the potential to consider a global values-based civilization. Now, this gets deep, and it's way beyond, what's discussed in public or private sectors. Remember, I'm viewing this from the perspective of human ingenuity and creativity. Where are we going as a species? So the date 2030, Nexus 2030, to me is highly significant. And I don't know if there's any way of specifically predicting what the outcome will be, but it's helpful. My mission is to make as visible the fact that we are standing as a species at this choice point. to either repeat the next class-based civilization or to make a shift, a conscious shift, because it's not going to happen automatically, towards a values-based civilization. Let me pause there, because that's also pretty deep. Anything you want to jump in?
No, I've got this
Right.
visual metaphor where I say we're all standing around the fight with asterisks and obelisks with the Romans, and we need to turn around and say this is the world we want to create and move towards that and ignore the fight, right? But yeah, the idea of holding on. The other thing that sort of really concerns me about some of the sort of rhetoric in the world right now is the anti-woke, the DEI, that sort of thing. At the time we need to be moving in the values-based direction, we're actually pulling back, the idea that these ultra wealthy white males are the only ones that can solve the problems when they're the reason we're in the problem that we're in. But there's one thing that you were talking about, that the world has never been in a situation at a global scale. And that's the difference between now and the 26 reference points you were mentioning. When the Romans fell, it obviously impacted a lot of Europe, Africa. But this is global scale. And that's, to me, the difference between what we're facing now. But yeah, totally agree.
And the point, to make it very specific, is that in previous civilizations, there was some way to go when your empire collapsed. This time, Mars is the only place to go, and even that's not guaranteed at this point. And to pick up on your diagram, Andrea, of the polycrisis, so all those individual things on your chart are indicative and are things that have happened towards the end of every previous civilization. So if we convert the symptoms that you very accurately predict on your graph, maybe you want to bring it up to so your viewers can see it if you're ready for that. But all of those collectively are merely pointing to the end of the normal way that we've become accustomed of doing things for the past 12,000 years. So this is not a simple habit to break. This is not going to be an easy journey. But for me, it helps, position where we're at and what's going on.
Yeah, those of you listening on the podcast right now, serves you right for not getting us on YouTube. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, there's rich things being shared on. Maybe you want to, when you finish the podcast, come back to the YouTube channel and get the visuals. But there's Andrea's diagram for those who can see it. Do you want to mention anything specific on there, Andrea?
Yeah, I mean, I ran through it, and I've added, as you might have noticed, I've added to it from last week, because you made a point about the meta crisis being different to the polycrisis because it brings in the spiritual element, and I'm torn between the terms. So as a PR person of many years, one term wins out, and I feel that the polycrisis is that term, but to me they mean the same thing. I think there's a slight difference in the definition, and I think you're right. But it's basically everything, that all of these things are happening at the same time. So from pollution, forever chemicals and their impact on us as well as all living beings, all of the extreme weather events, food insecurity, famine, war, civil war, nuclear war, supply chain vulnerabilities and the impacts that they have, the mental health crisis, the spiritual crisis, the radicalization of people of faith is something that really concerns me. I think it's going to be one of the biggest problems that we're going to be facing, and we're already seeing it emerging. So there's so many things. Social cohesion, that's a really big focus area in Asia. The cultures in Asia are very much focused on social cohesion, and I think the Western individualistic world could look to Asia to learn a lot, but typically they're too arrogant. But yeah, cost of living crisis, energy, peak oil, it's all there. Everything that's happening, it's all happening at the same time.
Yep.
It's phenomenal, because what you're describing, I'm quite taken aback here, because you're clearly operating at an extremely high level of thinking, which is, far beyond what I can initially comprehend, even though I prepared reasonably for this. But what we have on the chart here for the polycrisis, and I tend to think very much in 10 to 30 year cycles, because I like economic history. I can draw inference. It helps me in my job. I managed money for 30 plus years. But the symptoms, also not the symptoms, but what being displayed is actually exactly the same as it is for an empire cycle.
Exactly.
And the polycrisis, to me, the first thing that struck me when Andrea showed me that chart is that pretty much all of these things are connected.
Yeah.
Yes.
They just come in different expressions, but actually what's wrapping it is all connected to the same story. And I look, at a much smaller scale and much shorter cycles. But the one thing for me, which is like the alarm bell and make it in my profession a tradable event, something that I can position for and hopefully exploit and make money from, is always the excesses. When you see the signal of the excesses, and it doesn't just need to be material excess, but it is definitely the shape of how excesses are permeating society. The cycle is very close to an end.
Yeah.
And on the empire cycle now, we can see what the excesses are and what that will look like. But unlike previous episodes, if I didn't like what I see, I could shut down and hibernate for a couple of months or even a year or two, and then come back and pick up the pieces and make lots of money. This time, there's nowhere to go.
Right.
There's absolutely nowhere to hide.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that makes it very, very different from, there is always a certain amount of predictability to an economic cycle when it ends. Pinpointing it, that's the hard bit. And if you're really good at it, you make a lot of money. But there was always somewhere to go.
Mm.
Yep.
And
I just wanted to mention, Carol Lim has said, I subscribe to the theory of the Moloch of the meta-crisis. I don't know that. I'm going to look for it. Gets a bit depressing sometimes thinking about the pervasiveness and depth of the root of the problem. I think we can all agree we've been on the journey of depression through this knowledge, come out the other end. I do believe there is a path forward. And I will never give up, because like Michael, I'm fighting for my boys. But I do think part of the journey is the acceptance that there will be immense suffering in the world because of what we're going through. And accepting that is a very difficult thing to do. But denying it is going to make it harder, because there's no way we can get through this without it. No?
This is such an important point, and if I may unpack it a little further, because I think it's worth spending a bit of time on this. So one person who's very good at explaining this, he calls it Theory U. So Arthur Sharma, who's at MIT, has created a whole body of work called Theory U. And the point is that you're going down, 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 looking at the human condition, reaching the absolute bottom and realizing this is so bad. There's no hope through this. But then eventually starting the journey up the other leg of the U, to the point that, well, if we focus on only what's ending, then things are pretty bad. However, if we focus on what's emerging, there's so much more hope, to the point that I'm quite optimistic about where the human species could get to. But this point of, I refer to it as the abyss, staring deep into the abyss of the human condition. And frankly, until you've done that, you can't really consider the rest of the stuff that we're going to discover in this call. So for somebody who's extremely comfortable now, who thinks that life is hunky-dory and everything's ticking along, there's no convincing that individual. And it refers specifically to the elite class, not only today, but in every previous fall of empire. There's a concept called hubris, and the way they think about the world, because they're surrounded by such immense wealth, and people, their peers, are in similar aspects of immense wealth. So there's no reason for them to consider the kind of things that we're going to discuss next in the call. And it's that thinking itself that ultimately leads to the collapse of empire. All of the 26 books are pretty clear on this, and the meta study is pretty clear on this. It's the hubristic thinking of believing that their technological solutions, meaning technology, whatever was available at the time, could pull society through, and it inevitably fails. So
well,
it's a great.
I'm looking at this, and I'm hearing, listening back to what we talked about earlier, which was about the beauty of good and evil, right? And I'm thinking about how World War I was supposed to be the war that settled all wars, and that out of that they came up with some solutions, which of course did not quite work. Hence World War II. And it was because of the horror and all the different things that happened along the way, the problems that came out. You mentioned the logistics that came out of war wartime organization. There was all the creativity that was unleashed. The British were, well, the British and the Germans, to be fair, actually were highly creative during the war, and that stuff has also had impact on our lives. Plus the discovery or understanding about how, if you punish too much, or you try to make, like in the case of what they did with Germany, they made Germany pay too much for World War I. World War II happened, right?
Yep.
I think we're missing sometimes that the future is bright. The question is whether we'll be there for it. I mean, that really is and I think that's the hubris part of it, right? We can know. In fact, for me, I do know there is a brighter other side to all of this, but there's a part of us that wants to make it through it as well. I think as an organism, as a society, or not, actually the society will not survive. I don't think so, because you're right. It's in decline. It'll disappear, and there will be a fight to replace it. There has to be a fight to replace it, because even all these empires you talk about before that are based on values, they didn't just appear based on values. There had to be a conquest of sorts as well before then values were installed, and then everyone subscribed to it. And even then as well, they come to their point where the system breaks, right? So that's kind of where we are. So the U sometimes is the U-shaped thing is invisible to us. We're all on this swing together, and I think the real terrifying bit is, are we going to come out on the other side, right? I mean, there is the possibility that as we fight amongst ourselves, someone misses the fact that an asteroid's coming, and an asteroid changes the way the world exists, like it did for the dinosaurs. Not just dinosaurs, the entire planet at the time. But out of that, came the rest of it, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, I can see that. But it sounds, as much as that's the realistic way to look at it, as like this is what the truth actually looks like, I think the human spirit can't really accept it. That's the real challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think
my view on this, but if I may just quickly do a time check, we're coming up on the hour. Are you?
Yeah, no, keep going. Yeah,
keep going. Keep going.
Yeah. Do you want me to put your image back up?
Please, if you don't mind, and maybe just to pick up on what Joe was saying there. So it's my considered opinion, after all the stuff that we're still going to go through, is that we're in for a period of extreme discontinuity, and there's potentially going to be some very unpleasant things happening. Where we have conscious agency is deciding on how long that period is going to be. So the period between the fall of the Byzantine Empire and the Peace of Westphalia was 300 years. We could potentially shorten that to 100 years or 10 years, or why not 1 year? So when this reset happens, we have enough in place to make that period of discontinuity as short as possible. And, it's the first time that we as a species can consider this. One, because of our global ability to communicate via the internet, but secondly, the emerging form of mycelial consciousness. Maybe this will make more sense as I go into it. So maybe just to move on then to the next one, which is the human condition. And what I refer to here is basically mis, dis, and malinformation. If we go back to the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which was between Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, there was a whole lot of information being collected on users, but essentially it was used to sway the first Trump election, if I'm not mistaken. The point about that incident is that there are now many more examples, particularly with AI. AI is being used to influence opinions online. And what I've noticed is groupings of people that are particularly concerned about an aspect. So it could be health and pandemics. It could be climate and sea level rise and everything related to climate change. It could be monetary concerns, because there's a huge body of people that are, Richard is probably aware of them, that are discussing how best to protect your wealth or to make intelligent decisions and so on. So there's lots of conversations going around in the investment space. But usually within these spaces, there's very little awareness of what's going on in other groups. So these bubbles have been created online with very large, I'm talking, hundreds of millions of people all gathering in one particular aspect, discussing their thing, unaware of similar conversations going on in a different space. And to keep in mind that it is AI bots that are often generating the content to keep you trapped in that little filter bubble. I'm sure Joe would have a huge amount to add to that. I don't know if you want to jump in now or leave it towards the end.
Oh, so one of the things I think we really, really need to start be thinking about is we've got to. So the whole social media thing was about sort of global access. I think we've actually got to start going more local access, in person as well as digitally. The people the people you trust, and then I think of, people doing what we're doing, right? If someone put out an AI version of our show, it should be very obvious to anyone who's been listening to us that it's bullshit, because we've got a body of work behind us, right? But for someone who's just starting out, who hasn't set themselves up, I think it's going to be very difficult and very easy for AI to, someone who's not, doesn't have good intentions behind them, to do something against them. I think that's a problem. Yeah, Joe?
Well, if I can just say, the one thing that makes sure that you can know that this show is not AI is the fact that it goes for 2 hours, which is not an AI trick.
Right, it's good to know. So long form content might actually work for the left.
Well, no, long form. The thing about AI is that it reveals itself, even though it's very good and it can be of high quality. It reveals itself after a long period. So if you're just watching a show that's been put together for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, the AI can do a pretty good job. But the moment you talk more and more about something, get deeper into something, then AI becomes repetitive, and it can't create the new ideas yet. It can't quite synthesize those new ideas and make them non-repetitive. So that's for me sometimes a telltale. And even though the rest of it, I must say, it's hard to tell. It's impossible sometimes to tell.
But Joe, that's such an amazing opportunity, right? Because I've been saying to people for ages, this is a really complex topic, and you can't do it in 5 minutes. And people are like, I haven't got time. Well, make time, because now your attention is going to be basically taken by bots who are not going to tell you the truth. So here you go. The right to spending 3 hours with Joe Rogan. The left can finally spend some time rather than being distracted. So I think that's a win, personally.
So if I may pick up on to tie in this AI theme, so the one little square on this or node on the mind map is the economics of problem perpetuation. So these are basically the individuals holding on to all their investments in the existing empire. Now that means the way of thinking, it means wealth, it means the way of coordinating human activities. It's a whole huge thing which I refer to as interstructure. Infrastructure is the physical built environment, but then you also have your social aspects of what makes society work, your education, your medical systems, and all the rest. And then they have interrelationships between them. So the entire collection is called an interstructure. And there are people that are heavily invested in that interstructure continuing as long as possible. So this is why there are incredibly large benefits in continuing the way things are rather than trying to change them. And there's a wealthy group of people that do not want any kind of change. Now, to pick up on the AI side of this, we must remember that AI can only be trained on everything that we know around material consciousness. So for those that are familiar with how AI works, large language models, they basically suck in all the information, Wikipedia, published books, and all those good things. But all of those represent material consciousness. AI cannot talk to us around mycelial consciousness. It has no concept around it. I know because I've tried testing it on this. So if we're looking for what's emerging, AI has its uses, and I'm a big fan of AI. I use it a lot. But provided I understand that whatever answers I'm going to get from it are steeped in material consciousness, it's steeped in what's ending. As long as we know that, then we can go and figure out, well, who do I need to speak to who's familiar with what's emerging, and have those one-on-one place-based conversations. We're going to get more into that, but Andreas already mentioned it. Okay, let's move on now to the last group of nodes in the mind map. And this to me is the one that is possibly the deepest, most controversial, and makes no sense unless we've been through the bit that we've already discussed as a bit of a preface to getting to this point. But you'll remember we started...
I'm just going to put some coffee powder and just avoid... I'll miss out the water thing. I'm just going to just inhale the powder to get a bit of a boost to understand this.
Well, I mean, are we okay to keep going? Otherwise, we can...
Yeah.
Absolutely. Fire away.
Right.
Just ignore me, I'm the clown.
And it's good to be lighthearted about these very heavy subjects, because if we can't laugh about it, then it means we haven't understood it enough.
You have to.
Yes, exactly. And Michelle has put a comment in there, Xeon. So Michelle has created, I'm going to talk on your behalf, a platform that allows any chatbot to query the more mycelial consciousness of it. Now, I only managed to get it to work once, and then it didn't work thereafter. So if you'd like to link up with Michelle on LinkedIn, he's got something there. I'm not sure it's fully working yet, but I know that he's working very hard in the background to try and crack this. Really, really interesting stuff, worth looking into if anyone's particularly interested in this. Xeon, yes. Okay, let's move on to the last blob then. So right at the beginning, we spoke about the beauty of good and evil. We spoke about thesis coming against antithesis, and then a synthesis pops up. So my big question, and this is the bit that came through over the Easter weekend, what is the thesis, what is the antithesis, and what is the synthesis? Now, it looks to me, and this is from huge amounts of research, again, all of this stuff is in the research database. It looks to me as if thesis is a long-standing globalist plan, pretty much funded by money that originally came from the Rockefellers and Standard Oil. And they've pretty much, through World War I and World War II, have funded the creation of global institutions like the UN, the IMF. And this plan has been unfolding steadily over 100 or more years. Now, that's typically what we refer to currently as the deep state. So that's the thesis, and they're dead set on implementing full-on global control. The mechanism by which they're going to do that is through the issuing of central bank digital currencies, but more importantly, those digital currencies are linked to all kinds of surveillance systems. So Joe obviously is aware in Singapore, there's a high level of surveillance. In China, they have the social credit score. I'm sure your audience is already familiar with that idea. So essentially, that's what these central bank digital currencies are attempting to be linked to. Now, the antithesis to all of that is Trump and his merry men. Now, when I mention him, I'm neither for nor against Trump nor any political party. I'm looking at this at the very high level, how human behavior is affected by systems. The system within which we're currently operating is the falling or the ending of an empire. So Trump represents the inevitable 1.001% of the extremely elite class that ends up at the top of a class-based civilization. This is inevitable. It's not through, it may be because of his genius, but the point is that if it weren't him, it would be somebody else. If it weren't Musk, it would be somebody else. These are simply patterns that appear at the end of an empire. So they've now come along as the antithesis, saying, no, this is not right. We're not going to have the deep state. We're not going to have central banks issuing these digital currencies. We know better than them. We're going to break down all of the bureaucracy and all the stuff that we don't like about what we've seen unfolding over the past 100 years. And we're bringing an alternative, which is a privately issued digital currency. So this could potentially be issued by Trump himself. It could be issued by one of the very large financial institutions, BlackRock, for example. I don't know how that will play out, but it seems clear to me that that is the antithesis. So referring to Tulsi Gabbard and what she was saying as the political elite, she's referring to the thesis. And she and the Trump and Musk groups are the antithesis, and they're clashing heads now. And in my view, there is a race on as to who can implement that central currency linked to surveillance. So on the antithesis side, you've got Palantir, you've got Peter Thiel and all of his guys, which is pretty horrific stuff. All of the technology that's being tested in the Middle East wars, that's all Palantir stuff. Within the riots that are happening in the US right now, there's all kinds of surveillance that's already going on. All of this stuff is being tested already. And so you're having this very large clash happening. Now, the key point about the clash is that there are internal inconsistencies within both thesis and antithesis, which means that at some point they are going to fail. And usually it's the uprising of the population that says, you know what, we've seen through what's going on. This is enough. We're revolting. And then popping out of that will be the synthesis. So I'm going to labor the thesis and antithesis a little bit further before we talk about the synthesis. So I believe that a monetary reset will be announced at some point. And we've got an example of this after the Second World War, after Bretton Woods. The Nixon shock was essentially the reset that was announced. And to put it more in context so we can understand what a reset means, if you think back to how the world was shut down during the COVID reset, think about how it affected you personally. There were all kinds of activities that you could no longer participate in. This time, that reset will be linked to a monetary system. So, for example, you're going to walk up to the ATM, which you could quite easily do during COVID. You could punch in your PIN number and you could still withdraw cash. This time, you're not going to be able to do that. This is my view based on all of the readings of the documentation. The key documents to read and person to look into is Stephen Moran, who's in the US administration, who wrote a plan which is now being called the Mar-a-Lago Accord. So lots of detail in there. We can discuss a little bit here, but I won't be able to go into too much of the detail. Michelle is mentioning 2027. Maybe we should ask him how he knows that date. But it's certainly between now and 2030. Why do we know it's 2030? Because of the Great Reset announced by the World Economic Forum. Many other global institutions have publicly published papers all referring to 2030 as the date. So I suspect that the thesis group of people will, when they believe that they are ready, they will create, it could be a health pandemic again. It could purely be a monetary thing. We're not clear on what it's going to be, but at some point there will be another global shutdown, similar to what we experienced during COVID. And then at that time, antithesis will step in and say, hold on, these CBDCs are not going to work. Here's a privately issued token of some sort. Rather come and accept this. Now, there's masses of layers of detail that we need to get into, but this is the framing of what I believe is going to unfold as the end of this empire. It will result in all kinds of disruptions to our normal way of living. And what will make navigating that time easier is being able to understand that this is what's unfolding. Because what we'll experience in that time is a barrage of all kinds of news articles of different levels and layers of horror, essentially. Now, those individual news items and events, if you think about a laser pen and a cat, we've all done it where we shine a laser pen on the floor and the cat goes crazy, dancing from one spot to the next. Those news events are intentionally designed just to keep us busy like the cat while the monetary reset is being implemented. So let me pause there. I believe that I may well have opened up a huge hornet's nest here.
I was just going to say, Michelle, I can see your comments on LinkedIn, but they're not all coming over here, so I'm not necessarily putting them all at the right time, but we'll have a look later. But Richard, what do you think?
Well, it's, taken aback again by your incredibly high level and deep understanding of the subject area. It's fascinating to follow. And, we could spend hours and hours debating this. And it links very much with my belief system, which is the shorter cycle is coming towards an end. The excesses are there for us to see, but also I would describe it as insane drive for growth. And the insane drive for growth is there only to serve the debt cycle, which is coming to an end. And the debt cycle is effectively, for me, like, any drug addict. You find something that works in small doses initially, you keep on increasing, and eventually you need a higher and higher dose to ever get back to that initial feel-good feeling. And, if you get me started on how we measure growth, I think it's a complete insanity, because it's actually not very hard to achieve growth. And that tallies incredibly well with the natural aspect of, for me, how an economy is supposed to work and how you get good growth. And I know it's a nebulous concept, but to me, growth is never, ever the target variable. It's the outcome of having taken good decisions and running with good policies. And I don't know if I'm going to get to 2% or 1%. And actually, I don't care, because I'm doing the right thing. And eventually we have an outcome that hopefully, and in all most plausible scenarios, is good.
Yep.
But if I say I'm going to hit 3% growth no matter what, I can promise you that the stuff we do on the way to that 3% will have repercussions for years and decades to come. And I just cannot fathom that concept, because I think it's an incredibly poor way to run an economy, or run a company, or run a household, or your personal finances. Because actually, you shouldn't be dependent on achieving a specific numbers to have the ability to come out feeling good on the other side. There should be other variables that dictate that. So I'm very, very aligned with your thinking. But, my understanding is that big compared to yours. But the mindset tallies totally with how I see it. And for me, 2030 is an extremely plausible date for the end of the debt cycle, because I think that we're already at the edges of the fraying of people feel, and most importantly, a lot of very smart people I know who have spent years in finance are coming round to the view that, paper currencies are not all they were set out to be, because at the end of the day, they're only backed by the faith of the US government. Yep. And how much can I trust that now if I buy a 10-year note?
It means a huge amount that at least the framing of the thinking fits in with you, because the monetary side of it is something I do not understand at all. The cycles, I know they exist, but I don't personally understand them. If I may just highlight a book, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with, is Debt, the First 5,000 Years, David Graeber. And he essentially talks, he has another pattern, over long periods of time, a pendulum swings between debt-based monetary systems and credit-based monetary systems. So this is a kind of segue to the synthesis part of it. But let's, before I go there, just to mention that a book has covered this already. The whole growth thing is all linked to a debt-based monetary system, and it simply can no longer continue. We've reached the limits of growth, which was announced in 1970. But it doesn't mean, so there's a degrowth movement. I'm not in favor of the degrowth movement, only because a living system can never stop growing. When growth stops, the system dies. So the form of growth changes. But we'll get into that when we get into synthesis, if we still have some time.
Absolutely. And it's a great shame David is not here, my partner, because, he would probably have a much better understanding than I have at the level you operate. But he came up with an expression which at first it sounded a little bit wacky to me, but actually tallies totally with what I'm expressing in financial terms and you are expressing at the very top level, and that's growth at nature's pace. Nature moves along. We get the harvest, the tree gets bigger, and there is growth, whether we like it or not. And I don't like the degrowth movement either, for that reason, and for the fact that it's very hard to sell a defeatist story to people. Growth is good. It's just how we define it and how we achieve it. We should have a debate about.
Exactly.
But I think we do need to be careful that, like, the degrowth movement are very, very well intentioned. And they've come up with a model that they're trying to get people behind, and they're not wrong. It's just there's so many people with different ideas, and it's just how do we move forward? What's the right idea, And so I think that, but I think the defining. I love David's. We've got to grow at nature's pace. It's the simplest thing.
Fantastic.
Right?
Yeah. And if we have a kind of a a warm year with lots of rain, the harvest will probably be a bit bigger than the drought laden next year, but we will still have something. We just don't know that it's 1.3%. And if we miss that, we go out and we explain what we did wrong. It's like, no, you take what you get, you make sure you run the kind of policies and the ideas that are linked to us somehow being able to keep this planet intact and, ensure that our children and grandchildren and their children also has a place where they can thrive and look to tomorrow in a prosperous way.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that is a good segue to move into the synthesis, which is the better part. This is the good news part of the call. It took us
thank goodness
to get to it. Now, if I may straight, the synthesis will happen based on historical patterns. So the only question in my mind is how quickly this will happen. And when I lay out what I think is unfolding now, really the invitation is for us to consciously make a choice to focus on the synthesis. So yes, the bad stuff is happening. We're not going to stop that, in my view. All of the symptoms on Andrea's very detailed and accurate diagram of the polycrisis, although there are people passionately working on every single one of those systems, I personally no longer believe, and I was in the space where we can stop climate change, we can end world poverty, all of those things. I no longer believe that it can happen, but that a reset will stop all of it anyway. And the reset is going to happen based on history. And the only thing that we have control over is the length of time during which we go through potentially uncomfortable period of time. So this synthesis is an invitation for anyone who feels inspired by this sort of stuff to try and make this happen as quickly as possible. So firstly, what I think will happen is that a global shutdown similar to what we had during COVID will occur. This time you will be forced to accept a new kind of currency. So even those who have investments, pension funds, you'll be forced to switch them into whatever the new currency is, whether it's a central bank digital currency or a privately issued currency. And the risk is if you don't make the switch, then you lose out. Your existing fiat-based investments are worth nothing overnight. The cost of accepting the new currency is, of course, that it's linked to the various surveillance systems. So you now ended up in what they call a technocracy. And in the mind map, there's a massive amount of research, videos, books that have been written around explaining what a techno-feudal future will look like. We won't go into the detail of that because I personally believe that it doesn't have a chance of succeeding long-term. When we take the evolutionary impulse into consideration, this concept of growth of living systems, my worldview is that all technological solutions will eventually succumb to their own internal inconsistencies. It may not look like it when we see the progress in the AI race and technological developments and so on. It looks as if it's going incredibly well, but there are inbuilt inconsistencies that will eventually cause it to collapse. Based purely on history. That's not my opinion. That's a cycle that is unfolding. So the synthesis then, taking into account David Graeber's work that a pendulum swings from debt-based monetary systems into credit-based monetary systems, is something called a municipal mutual aid credit. Now, this takes into account a whole lot of work happening in the modern monetary theory space. It takes into account what's called a bioregional movement, which is groups of people that on their own accord, without being coordinated through public or private sector, they're coming together and restoring the health of rivers, lakes, oceans, mountains, soil, huge amounts of people all over the world. Again, in the research database, plenty of examples of what's happening. But these individuals are not being paid. There's no formal incentive mechanism. Most of them are struggling incredibly with funding, mainly because they're trying to fund their, if you view the activities happening in that space as weak signals of what's emerging. So it's the entirely new system that's completely separate from what is ending. And the reason they're struggling to get funding is because they are values-based, which in essence goes against this whole class-based system that is ending. And I've been involved in this space. I've attempted to raise funding. It's really challenging. We can unpack what the reasons are, but at a very high level, it's because this group represents the potential of a global values-based civilization that's emerging. And so a mutual credit currency, a name that I can mention here is Will Ruddick, who's based in Kenya, if I'm not mistaken, but he's currently doing work all over the world, specifically in the US, all around mutual aid forms of monetary systems, based on a principle called promise theory. And the way I see it unfolding is that you'll have bioregional groups of people. This is the place-based things that Andrea was mentioning earlier. They're coming together motivated by something within their region, be it a river, a lake, an ocean, a mountain, and they're issuing their own currency, but this time it's not debt-based. And I'm specifically excluding the majority of crypto-based tokens because their design still follows debt-based thinking. If you think about Bitcoin, it's created the class arrangement. You've got people at the top with the highest numbers of Bitcoin. So that's still a debt-based monetary system. Mutual credit is where you're promising to commit something to the community, commit something to the mountain, to the ocean, to the restoration of some geophysical thing in your bioregion, and currencies will then be issued against it. Now, there's emerging examples of this, but it's all very early, and all of them are still privately issued. So invariably, it's either a non-profit or a privately owned company that are issuing the tokens, and they haven't, I'm generalizing here, there are exceptions, but they haven't generally experience the velocity. Velocity is the speed at which the currency flows through a community. They haven't really achieved high velocity because there are very few places where you can go and spend those tokens. So I believe what will emerge is municipalities issuing these mutual credit tokens as funding dries up for them. All municipalities are struggling currently. They'll issue their own currencies, and an example of this came out of World War II, I beg your pardon, the Virgil, which is an Austrian experiment. So we've got an example to follow. There's no municipality that's doing this yet, except for one small municipality in Brazil, and I can share some detail around them. But this model will improve over time, mature, it'll become more accepted, so that as your debt-based currency eventually implodes, or as the reset is announced, you potentially have municipalities stepping into this space and saying, you know what, we're going to issue our own token. We're going to get the people of our municipality, which is a place boundaried entity, and get them restoring all of the activities. And we can incentivize those activities through a token that we issue, and we will accept that token as payment for municipal services. Which currently obviously doesn't happen. You can only pay for your municipal services in fiat currency. A lot of this has to do with belief systems, so what we believe about money. This is not going to be a simple shift, but at a high level, let me stop there. That's in essence what I believe the synthesis is. Groups of people in bioregions around the world absolutely committed to restoring some of the damage that has been done during our very rapid growth period, because we had to extract from the planet to fuel that growth. And so from a high level perspective, how the evolutionary impulse has driven the progress of this living system is that it intentionally allowed the creation of class-based societies, because class-based societies end up consuming a lot, and in order to support consumption, we had to have high levels of production. So we've had this cycle of class-based civilizations constantly allowing the human species to grow and improve and all the rest. Now we're reaching a shift in how we grow, which is no longer, if we think about teenagers who grow very rapidly physically, and then they eventually reach the maximum growth, and now they start growing intellectually. They go to university, they develop their cognitive skills, And so as a species, we're going to develop our spiritual or even planetary cognitory skills. How do we now focus our full attention on restoration of the planet and develop our mycelial consciousness, which will open up all kinds of spiritual angles, which we can't currently consider while we caught in the material consciousness phase. Let me stop there. How is that landing at a very high level?
No, it's good. Right. I was talking about bioregion regeneration as an opportunity last year when I did a series of videos, but one of the other ideas, so my oldest son has started national service and my next son will be starting it. And I think something like an environmental service, so all children, when they leave school for 2 years, they're obligated to go out and regenerate the land that they're part of, right? I think that would be a really, and learn basic life skills and all that sort of stuff. And then you could bring in something like, they all get paid a basic income. So basic income, universal basic income, that all starts to sort of happen, which could be the fiat sort of currency that you're talking about. But, David and Richard talk about nature's coins. I totally, there's so many different things you've just said there that resonate with me for sure. Richard?
Yeah, I think, again, the thinking is extremely aligned in how we see the world through the bigger lens and what is happening through it. And I think, for the reason we mentioned earlier, I don't think the current system will survive very much longer, whether we have cataclysmic, catastrophic change or a change for the better. Who am I to know? What I feel very strongly is that we will not go on for very much longer. So 2030 fits with my overall thinking very, very much. When you replace an accepted currency system, historically, the kind of quasi-currency that has always been more or less accepted has been gold. It has the longest history. And I happen to be quite bullish on gold, always have been. And, for 30 years, I've been either long or very long of gold because frankly, like my old boss used to say, Richard, gold is prisoner to a terrible investment thesis. Why would you own it? That's exactly why you would want to own it. So, and I can definitely see gold's role as the primary currency in the transition because it's something that has a form of historical relevance and acceptance in this context. But for a lot of practical reasons, gold will never be the main currency in tomorrow's world, but it certainly has a possibly great role to fill in that vacuum. Because the moment you go to your ATM and there is no money, all of a sudden the kilos of pasta you have at home become far more relevant.
Joe, you've been a bit quiet.
Andrea?
Well,
I was just going to say, Joe's been a bit quiet, and he's never quiet.
Well, I was thinking much more about the possibilities as in beyond what's going to happen now. There is the synthesis part of it. I think is where there's going to be a competition to be the most widely accepted of the synthesis solutions, right? So there is one synthesis that I see down the road, which is where something happens to all of us, and AI, library, everything digital right now becomes the repository or becomes the library from which civilization gets rebuilt or rebirthed, right? And even these things like the discussion about crypto and wealth and stuff like that, it's on one hand, there is all the inevitability of it, right? Like for instance, just within a simple market situation where there's a rally, the inevitability is going to be it's going to hit its high, and then there's going to be a bear market that follows that, right? There is this thing now that we're going into, which is the kind of euphoria of it all. And there's also the ability that we have to change what we're doing and transform it so that we can almost build the other part of the U at the same time as we're going in here. And if we can, I'm using a very poor analogy on an audio format, but I think if we can bring up the highs earlier, the moving averages don't have to go as low. We don't have to hit that terrible low, and that replacement can come in I think in a more gradual sense. So I do think there's a lot of potential in this idea of the future being about a different way of looking at crypto, for instance. And I think the way crypto is designed, or at least some of the new currencies are designed as well, those very things that we talked about can be done, right? We can draw a bargain. We can build a bargain into your cryptocurrency so that if you look after the planet looks after you, right? But I do think there's going to be something of a huge opportunity for those of us who are going to be looking at it from a trading perspective, to ride that wave that goes off the top. Because when you talked about things like how we grow at nature's pace, I think it's kind of a fallacy. We give, again, as much as we talk about hubris of ourselves, we tend to state what nature does. Nature is not a fine-tuned instrument. It doesn't plan. It doesn't go forward and try. It doesn't optimize. What it does is it flourishes to the point that it overwhelms sometimes the space. So the surges in animal populations that completely decimate an area, it resets. It goes through that process as well. Trees overgrow and then they fall over. Edges of land fall back into the sea just because of the way nature does its thing as well. So I think there's a little bit. Sometimes we make too much of a hero out of nature, saying if we do it the way nature does it, we'll be fine. I think what we should be doing is thinking, well, how do we then pull back the brakes? I think I've talked about this before. If we let nature take its course, I believe none of us should be here, and none of us on the call anyway should be here. Nature would have taken its course, and we would not be part of the problem of overpopulation. We would have been probably quite ill. Based on my lifestyle, I shouldn't be here.
So Joe, I think the indigenous populations can teach us what nature, how to work with nature, right? It's about you manage nature, but nature's ultimate goal is to be in balance, right? And we're not in balance. So when you were talking about like there's the story up near Greenland of the deers that were dropped there during the war, and then they ate everything and they got down to the roots, but the population kept increasing. They went back every like 10 years, and it's like, well, there's even more of them, and then there was too many of them, and they got down to the roots, and then they all died, right? So humanity is eating the roots right now. That's what I say. We're out of balance.
So what I'm saying is that yes, those are the examples where we've intervened and we've made a mess of it. But the same way nature also does that, as in it's just we're a part of the problem. I don't deny that, but I'm just saying that there is a thing. When we talk about balance in nature, it isn't actually balance. It's actually a state called equilibrium, right? So there is creation and death happening at the same time, and then where we are is actually in the middle, where the net result of death and creation is that state we're in right now. So yes, we are a big part of the problem, but it's also I have a little bit of a problem mentally to talk about it in terms of like let's just do what nature does, because nature is really, really quite harsh. And I
okay, yeah, I get it. It's an important distinction.
It
definitely.
is, and this is something I often find myself debating with people that, not surprisingly to most who know me fairly well, is that I have a strong libertarian streak, right? But I personally, on that level, is prepared to accept both sides of the coin. I don't have a fundamental problem with, bankruptcy. It's nature pace of saying the population was too big, it needs culling, it goes down. I accept the bankruptcy. What we find, and this is really strong bugbear of mine, is like things are going well, the cheerleaders are out, capitalism is great, we all now have 3 cars in our back garden, right? Instead of 1. we can all go on 2 holidays a year instead of 1. Of course, we need capitalism. And then, boom, the down market comes like 2008, and, it's a disaster. And it's a disaster because we have too much leverage in the system. Otherwise, it's not really a big problem. Then all of a sudden, capitalism is bad and we need intervention. That is not capitalism. That is the very pure definition of crony capitalism. I want to take the upside, and when the downside comes, I want everyone else to share my pain.
Yep.
I have a huge issue with that because I fundamentally accept that nature will bring some down and others will go on to survive. And I think I'm in a minority there. But for me, the harshness of nature is what makes it appealing. This is the survival of the fittest. And I think actually that is kind of ingrained in many aspects of how we should behave. You make bad decisions, you go under. That doesn't mean, I'm at the extreme end saying, I want people dying in the streets. But the whole idea we needed to put capital into the banks with taxpayers' money is not about people dying in the street. It's about me not wanting to lose my 3 cars in my back garden. And that I have a big problem with.
So if I may give a slightly different perspective on nature, I'm agreeing with everything that's been said, and we are nature. So a lot of the conversation, this recent bit is it's us and nature, and that's not the case at all. We are nature, and we're a keystone species within nature, which means that our actions directly impact all other species. Now, I'm attempting personally to move away from this perspective of we've done bad in the past. I think as a growing system, we've done incredibly well. We've pulled so many people out of subsistence. And we have the consciousness to realize, well, now we need to start tapering off and look at different forms of growth. Hence, potentially new monetary systems and all the rest. And then within the nature being harsh category, yes, and what humans have done because they have consciousness is, and this happens across indigenous as well as westernized ways of living, is manage nature, meaning how do we make the best out of nature? So one modern example, or rather an indigenous example, is fires. Across the prairies of India, there'd be massive fires because they knew that by burning off the top, it creates a healthier root, and eventually the next season's growth is much stronger. So that's managing nature, or more specifically, working with nature. A more modern example is syntropic agriculture, where you're planting, it's not monocrops, but you're planting them very close together and they grow at different heights, and you intentionally pruning quite aggressively, but that pruned material is going into the soil itself. So that's humans managing nature, where both nature and humans, if you want to see them separately, are benefiting from the process. So we'll see a shift more towards that. Humans have seen nature as a place to extract, and we've done incredibly well with it. We've created all the progress that we've seen over the past 12,000 years. And now it's time for us to, as the keystone species, work more closely with other species to restore some of the damage that we've done, which was necessary to fuel the growth so that we could get to this point of thinking about stuff at a very different level. So it's all part of a natural cycle. We may be beating ourselves up because of climate change and pollution and all this stuff that we've done. But if we view it as a very necessary process of getting to the point where we can focus on what the next form of our growth is going to be, then it's all part of the natural cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're just at that point, like, because being in Asia, I've got a front row seat to the pollution and its impact, right? And I've been on I lived in Thailand as well. We were in Phuket for 7 years, and I would see people from Europe, usually, lying on the beach covered in plastic, and I'm like, how can you do that? How can you not at least clean up the spot where you're sitting, and take your rubbish home, sort of thing? But people can't see it. They can't see it. But now that waste, where I've been watching it grow and its impact in Asia for the last sort of 10, 15 years, it's now everywhere, because once it gets in the sea, it's going to go, right? So that movement towards literally not seeing what is before our eyes, and that's from an information perspective, to physical physical impact perspective, that the insect debate, we grew up with our windscreens covered in insect. The kids today have never seen that. And we don't know what, the younger generation don't know what we've lost because they never had it. I had clean rivers, I had clean creeks, clean oceans, but my children have never seen that. And it drives me absolutely nuts. And that's why I'm such a fighter on that. But we've got to see it, right? But you're right, Michael. It's not about, to me, it's just like, can we just move forward on that bit? Because it's going to take hundreds or thousands of years to clean up the impact of that waste. It's going to have an impact on us as a species and all other living beings. It's impacting our endocrine systems. Human sterility is being impacted. It's going to have an impact on us for a very long time. We need honest research about the impact, and that's only just starting to come through, and now they're trying to take money away from research. Like, let's just get on with it. Let's just move forward. That's the bit I'm at. Like, we know what the problems are. Let's just start addressing them and put a realistic time scale. Hundreds of years, thousands of years. That's how long it's going to take to solve some of the problems. But we just have to start and stop doing what's causing the problems.
And I like, if you look into, if I may, Joe, sorry, just quickly to point you towards the regen movement. So there's incredible work already underway, but nobody reports on it. It's never in mainstream news. You never hear of them. It's incredibly inspiring when you shift your focus from all the stuff that's bad, and I'm completely agreeing with you, things are horrible. And instead of focusing on that, if we shift our focus towards what's emerging, because this is what will eventually survive anyway, from an historical record and from the perspective of the evolutionary impulse, how nature works, this is what we should be more investing our energy in. And so rather than, I don't think it's going to take 100,000 years. When you see the progress that's being made in the regen space, it's mind-blowing. And the technologies, here I'm talking about natural technologies, the things that they're doing in soil and all the rest, it's profound what can be done in a single season. There's some cattle farmers in Australia, for example, that have doubled their grass output with no rain during periods of drought by applying a particular process. I'd have to look up the details again. But within one season, they double the output of the grass in a drought season. So incredible things can be done.
Absolutely.
If we just shift our attention in the right direction. Sorry, Joe.
No, I was going to say, Michael, I really like the idea of thinking of ourselves as we are nature, because that's exactly what I think it is, right? And what I think that we have to do is to defy our nature for the planet to thrive. We are where we are, not because we have somehow risen above our nature. What we actually have now is the amplified expression of our nature. And what we need to do is damp it down. So we have to rise above that. So the thing that we've done with ourselves, just in terms of our life, in terms of our life expectations, our lifespan, health and longevity and stuff like that, we've done that because we've actually, in a sense, defied nature. But the one part of our nature that we're not defying is actually this inherent desire. And for me, this is the key problem in our design, right? Is that we were designed to be selected. That we're working to be selected, and because we have this key desire to be selected, we do whatever works within that frame. We look for status, we figure ways to signal, we want to feel better about ourselves, we want, so those things translate and become the symptom, which is consumption, which is trying to figure a way to live in a better place, to have more, to be better, than somebody else. And I think that's just leaning into our human nature, and maybe just going like, oh, that's just the way it is, right? It is that higher level that's really hard to achieve. It's where we are going to do what we do. I think for our families and the society, we hold back a little bit on some of our natural reactions to things. I think that's where the human race has to evolve to, where it becomes aware of its nature and goes like, okay, now we figure it out. But while we're doing that, it takes a while for all the other humans around us to sort of go, okay, I realize what's going on. And I think that kind of brings us back to this whole beauty of evil versus good, right? Is that we need, as much as we hate the idea, we need this terrible evil to happen so that we kind of go like, oh yeah, that was a bad idea. Let's figure this out, right?
If I may pick up on that, so this idea of human nature, I'm not a big fan of that. And what I mean is, when I refer to Donella Meadows, thinking in systems, she always said that it's the system that determines behavior. So from a human nature perspective, usually the scale is extremely selfish or extremely altruistic. But we know that as individuals, we move up and down that scale. Sometimes we're selfish, for example, when we're trying to protect our young from some outside somebody trying to take them away from us, and sometimes we're extremely altruistic. It depends on the circumstances or the system within which we find ourselves. We've found ourselves in a debt-based constant growth monetary system which promotes selfishness. I must look after myself, I must get to the top of the pile, I must be the best, all that sort of stuff. When we move out of that system into a more mutual credit, more altruistic kind of system, our human nature will be very different. And I think humans are adaptable enough so that when the system changes, it's called a punctuated equilibrium. You used the word equilibrium earlier. When the equilibrium is changed very rapidly, humans change very quickly too. We can see that in any natural disaster, a flood, a fire, 9/11, humans stepped in and did unbelievable things that required no prior planning or thought. They just respond in the moment. So our mental agility is pretty profound. Anyhow, that's what I think is coming. It's not so much about taking humans thousands of years to evolve. It's more about the systems evolving and humans adapting very quickly to those systems. I may be wrong, but certainly that's what I see from all of the evolution biologists.
No, I think what you're describing tallies again, and it's a shame David's not here. His thinking is more evolved because he's got a scientific background. I do not. And what he's describing is kind of the end of the extractive economics because the resources are gone. And I'm very much in that camp. And he then goes on to say that tomorrow will inevitably bring emergent economics, which is a very different kind of economics than the one we are being taught, the one we are being, for better word, behaviorally conducted into. I need to get to partnership before I'm 35, otherwise I failed in my role, etc. It really tallies what you're describing in the bigger system and the system change that is coming, that when something doesn't work, historically what we do is experiment and we see, oh, that didn't go so well, so we stop doing that and we start doing something else, and that really worked well. And in my mind, that is how a new emergent economics come about. We will find new ways, but we need to keep on trying new stuff all the time. And I think our modern society is very afraid of this in how we view failure, because you learn something from every time you fail. You can actually gain a lot more knowledge from that than you do from a success. And we need to start viewing and failed experiment as something that actually is very beneficial for the overall system. And then you can move on and go to the next phase. And here we try something different.
Yep. And there are many experiments going on. So
Yes.
in the alternative currency space, in the regen space, literally hundreds that I'm aware of, all in the research database of people experimenting on this. And many of them don't work because the currency isn't accepted, or, some logical reason which you didn't know about when you set out on the experiment.
Exactly.
Crops up. But in that supposed failure, there's constant progress. And so there's incredible progress happening in the regen space. So I'm very aware of the time, Andrea. As
it flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna. So I previously talked about this, but there was a piece of research done somewhere in California. I've never been able to find it. I heard it on a podcast. In the experiment, people were given a block of land, and basically through the questions, they were trying to work out, would you manage this sustainably, or would you basically take everything from it and have nothing left? And 30% took everything from it, and 70% were sustainable, right? And basically the experiment was about, 30% of this is my conclusion, 30% of humanity are sociopaths, narcissists, Machiavellian, that sort of mindset, and 70% aren't. The problem is the 30%, tend to get into positions of power, and if you take them out of power, there's always somebody ready to follow behind, and there's a lot of sycophants around the edge who all sit in the 30%. And then you look at colonial history. So I spent a lot of time thinking about, as an Australian, right? The Aboriginal community was flourishing, as far as we know, based on the archaeological records, for the longest of any species outside of Africa, right? And then we came and introduced our system, and within just over 200 years, look at the state of Australia, the state of its forests, the state of its rivers, and I think the colonial heritage has got a lot to do with it. So when Joe sort of said we have to defy our nature, I actually think there's a big reckoning that needs to be happen for those of us who come from the winning side. I'm from the winning side. We were on the victory side in World War I and World War II as an Australian, and a lot of us think that where we come from, we're the good guys. I've been teaching my sons about the concept of the good guys and the bad guys, and one of them was watching a movie on the Vietnam War the other day, and he said, "Oh, I thought the Americans were the good guys." And we took him to Vietnam, and if you've ever been to Vietnam, you got to go to the war museums, and they're very respectful towards the enemy. The Vietnamese are very respectful towards the enemy. That's not the opposite that's usually given. So I think we've got a bit of a reckoning of colonial heritage, of what it means, the damage that was done. I think we've got we can't undo what has been done. But the people who can move us forward are the people who actually continue to live this way, and that's our indigenous brothers and sisters. And yet all over the world, we're seeing that's not what's happening, whether it's the Maasai in Africa, the Australian Aboriginals, the First Nations people, that's not what's happening. So, I think that's a pretty good place to start too.
2 points, if I may. So you mentioned the Commons. The definitive work on this is Elinor Ostrom, who I think it was 1990 published Governing the Commons. And she won a Nobel Peace Prize around economics around this, because she proved fairly categorically that you can govern the commons, that this human nature, when allowed to do its own thing, can figure this stuff out. So it's a pretty profound book, that. And then the other on this reckoning, I'm in my own quandary around that space. So firstly, I'm involved in a very hands-on project in a valley of 25,000 people, where we've got indigenous folk and people who were thrown off their land through the South African apartheid laws and so on. And there's huge tension with lots of trauma that's held over understandably, from some horrific things that were done in the past. And I'm not sure that trauma can ever be healed. And so maybe this process is going to take so long that us oldies that were involved in that trauma have to die out. But it's the younger generation that can immediately see through our nonsense. I don't know how old your children are, but certainly my daughter is asking questions that gives me hope that there is time for their thinking not to be influenced by the way we've thought about stuff in the past, that maybe we're separate from nature, that we are the victors, all that stuff that you were mentioning. And it'll be the younger generation who run with the banner and make this stuff happen. That's my sincere hope anyway.
Yeah. Oh, we just got to look forward. It's like looking away from the Asterix and the Romans, right? We just got to look forward and say, what do we want to create? And we can hold on to the narratives of harm from the past, which isn't going to change anything. Or we can just look forward and say, what do we want to build together? What is the society that we want to build together? And then we get on with it, and we ignore all this other bullshit,
It's
Because
not
by-
so much ignoring it, because that can upset those who were affected by it. But if we
no,
say this is part of,
no, I didn't mean that. I
Right.
didn't mean ignore that. I meant
Oh, right,
ignore
right.
the tech bros and all that other bullshit that's going on. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And see that it is all part of the process. So part of where the mind map came from is, can we explain the human journey in a way that we no longer have to point fingers? We can say there is beauty in evil and good. And that because overall it's created this progress. Yes, there were times that we wish hadn't happened. And if they didn't happen, potentially we wouldn't even be sitting using this technology that enables this call. We'd still be sitting in caves with candles, maybe. And so it's all part of a beautiful unfolding with the good and the bad thrown in, the tension, the chaos that we see happening. It's a question of shifting our perspective. So we can doom scroll, we can immerse ourselves in all the nonsense that's going on, or we can intentionally shift our focus to what is emerging and choose to amplify those weak signals with the sole intent of shortening that period of disruption that's going to be when this next reset comes. And so maybe my final challenge is just for each individual who's watching this or involved in this to make very tough decisions. What will you need to know about a coming monetary reset? Assuming it's going to happen, will you accept the new currency that is always offered as the solution, accepting that there will be a huge amount of surveillance and all kinds of control around that? Or are you going to make some kind of decision towards a more libertarian, as Richard was saying, approach, which also results in the restoration of the planet? Whereas the control mechanism ends up in techno-feudalism. It's an attempt to continue the class-based system with further extractions to fuel the technology that's required for your own surveillance. These are big, big issues to discuss. I can help in some way. Maybe this is the right time to introduce that. I don't know when you want to wrap up your show, but over to you, Andre.
No, I think what you're talking about is really important. One of the signs of techno-feudalism is when they insert technology. Of course, they're looking at technology being inserted into brains already, right? And they're positioning it as a very positive thing for people who like quadriplegic and paraplegic, and absolutely that's a great thing. But the idea that we will all have technology inserted into our bodies, which actually means, this is the craziest bit. I don't know if you guys think about this as much as I do. They also then have access to your thoughts. Now, they already have access to your thoughts depending on how much information you're putting into the system. But the idea of actually when the technology is inserted into our brains, they will actually have real-time access to our thoughts. And that's the path that we're on. And the normalization of technology, the stuff you wear on your head, your phones, wearable tech, listening tech at home. I've been putting a blog together this week. I'm like, the amount of data we willingly give away, that's going to get more. When are we going to say, wait a minute, this isn't necessarily a good idea for society?
Yep.
Yeah, no,
Joe? Oh, sorry, Richard. Yeah.
No, I'm fairly certain of one thing, and very conscious of the time here, is that we will definitely need to ask Michael back in the autumn.
Totally.
To continue.
Yeah. But there was a lot of topics but there's a lot of topics I think we could just drill down in, just like each of the points that you were talking about. We could go much deeper. Like you were sort of saying, one of the things you were talking about was amplify the weak signals, and the overwhelm of news was something that you were talking about. And I totally respect where you're coming from a point of view you don't want to pay attention to the news. One of the ways I'm trying to make sense of this time is paying attention to the news, because I'm looking for the trends, and I'm looking for the weak signals as well. I'm always looking for the weak signals, because I think one of the things that people don't understand is the big money has the loudest voice.
Yep.
And the smallest voices are the ones that don't have the big money, and it's very difficult to hear them. But you've got to look for those. So the weak signals that you were talking about, the really great work being done, the revolutionary work being done, we've got to find it. We've got to support it, because the people who are making money are not necessarily those that I would consider. Well, so that what did you call it? They're part of the not that when you were talking about you gave it a term? I can't remember what the term was. They're part of that. The end of the
end
civilization.
of what we considered normal. End of normal.
So that the people who are making money, the people who got the loudest voices, they're that. The people who are trying to create the new value-based society, they're not getting paid. A lot of them.
Yep.
They're often not even able to pay their rent. They're doing it because they really believe in what they're doing. So the wealth in the world needs to start funding that, so those people, because a lot of people have to stop because they can't afford to keep going, or their marriages break apart because there's too much stress at home, or all those things, right? So the money and the focus needs to go on those people, but the money is behind these other people who are not necessarily serving humanity. And I think that's the most important thing to do. Get out there and be a cheerleader for the people who've got the guts to get out there and, speak up.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Yes.
Well, I think we have to round the corner and round up the show. It's. I mean, look, we could go on for days, I think.
Long time.
Yeah, well, we didn't get to go through any of the news, but of course the weekend reads will come out tomorrow. And I'll just put everything that we were going to talk about. I think maybe next week, Richard, if we can, we'll get you to talk about the World Bank's announcement, because I think it's not.
Yeah,
it's not.
It tallies with all this, When it makes the headlines and growth makes the headlines, you're very, very deep into the cycle, because now it's actually becoming mainstream to see we need growth. Why are there more lorries on our roads? More lorries means there's more growth. It's like, really, come on, guys.
Yeah. Yesterday, when I sent the links for the news, I said, Iran escalation, what's going on here? ? And of course, overnight, we woke up to the news and that's not a thing that we want to see. Loads of stuff going on. Turkey's lost 75% of its apricots. So stock up on apricot jam. All right. I've had a stock of olive oil for 5 years now, because I always have boxes of tins of tomato because I'm tracking droughts and I know what it means. And Greta Thunberg, I've got to say, so there's a classic example of a person that is just treated so appallingly badly in the media, but also by people in our communities. She had the guts to get out there and do what she did. And I love, when she's at the airport and they're asking her about her experience, she's like, that's not the news. The news is, and she was talking about what was going on in Gaza. So good on you, Greta. But the final thing before we wrap up, first of all, Michael, who do you think we need to get on the show?
So a young German philosopher, but wise beyond his years, David Rugg. I'm probably saying his last name incorrectly, and I'm not even sure if he'd be willing. He's a very private individual, but he's working on something profound called Project Liminality, which addresses directly what you're saying. How do you find the weak signals? How do you amplify the really good stuff going on? But he's got I've seen lots of news aggregators, and I've seen lots of people attempting this from different perspectives. He's got a really unique take on it. And I'll share his contact details. Whether he'll be willing to join or not, I don't know. But he's a very, very interesting person to talk about. Weak signal amplification at its best, as far as I'm concerned.
Wow.
The philosophers, they're quite a shy bunch, but they're actually the people that we should be listening to right now. Daniel Ratzenberger is one of my favorites. He's got the best beard I've ever seen, apart from that. But he's just
Ratzenberger, right? Yep.
Yeah, he's really cool. He's too famous. I think if I reached out, he'd ignore me. But I'd love to get him on, because I think philosophy. Yeah, you got to try, right? You said yes. All right, so we'll leave the AI bit for now, but we'll finish with distractions. We've got to do that. What's keeping you distracted?
Well, before you do that, if you're supposed to put out the information on how to get hold of Michael's course, I think that would be useful. That'd be great.
Well, how about I suggest that as my distraction? So why don't you kick off with what's distracting you, and then...
No, you start.
All right, so you've got it up on the screen.
Talk about your course.
So what I'm doing is, for those who realize we're going to go through quite a reset, is how do you prepare yourself mentally for this? Now, this is not a prepper course. I've been involved in prepper communities before, and it's buying the long life food that Andrea was mentioning. That's important, but we don't cover any of this in the course. It's more specifically, what are the signals that are pointing towards a monetary reset coming, and how do you look for those signals, just so that you're aware of it. So that's tracking what's happening in the real world. But more importantly, how do you connect with the communities already doing incredible stuff? How do you prepare yourself to step into those communities? Because at this stage, they're quite protective of the work they're doing. And how do you prepare yourself mentally for some pretty challenging times to come, not from a survival perspective, but from a thriving perspective? So the whole angle of the course is, how do you prepare yourself to be at the cusp of the really good stuff emerging? It's material that I've put together basically for my daughter, because she's not being taught this in the schooling system. And even though she's in a very alternative schooling system, they're not thinking along these lines. And yet I think the time when this comes is approaching incredibly rapidly. So if it resonates, it's not a hard sell. And then for the first 50 people who respond, I've created a little coupon there in celebration of the new program, the new channel that you're launching. So Shit Show, that'll give you a fairly hefty discount off it. And it'll be great to welcome you on that. We're starting at the end of this month is the first class that we go through.
Cool.
I think that might be the first time in history that particular promo code's ever been used.
I hope so.
I mean, just, if you're listening, I just really encourage you. You've listened to what Michael had to say, but preparation. There's a lot. We were talking about the preppers stuff, and that's a great community to follow. They're fantastic. I love what they talk about. But there's a lot of different forms of preparation. Financial preparation, as you were saying, but preparing your mind. I think a lot of people don't even. I've spoken to so many people. I don't even want to go there. I'm like,
and that's a fair choice. Yeah,
it is a fair choice, but it's still coming for you. Like there's no getting away from this, right? So I think whatever you can do to help yourself prepare, you're not going to regret that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wise words.
It's true, right?
Yeah.
Richard, what's distracting you? Please don't tell me it's Ukrainian war.
No. It's baby boy turning 30 in 10 days.
Oh, yeah. Does it make you feel really old?
It does. I am really old, so that's okay on one level. But it's the passage of time, to me, it doesn't feel that long ago. He was a tiny little creature in hospital, and I walked home. He was born in Stockholm, so I walked from the hospital home in the small hours to get a shower and go back, a few hours later. And it doesn't seem that long ago. It really doesn't. It's 30 years ago. So that's scary.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's a big distraction for sure. But I love Paris, and he lives there. So we are going over in 2 weeks' time. Yes.
Nice.
Beautiful.
Well, happy birthday.
Yeah.
All right, Joe, what weird and wonderful thing are you watching, listening to at the moment?
Well, I've been listening to all kinds of crazy stuff, but watching, I was introduced to this by my wife. The series is on Netflix, and it's called Department Q, which is kind of a fun take on the it's you may have heard the old series. Remember Cold Case? There used to be a series called Cold Case. This is a twist on that. It's a nicely done piece where essentially a bunch of misfits get organized into a department that looks into some cases that nobody wants to look at. They look like an impossible case, and it's a very deep journey. Actually, you kind of think that it's going to evolve into something where they're doing many cases, but they just suck you in on one very interesting one. And it's a nice British series. And the good thing about British series is that they tend to end. So this particular one has an ending as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. I've seen it. Scottish too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, which I think kind of makes it quirkier. So Steve's been away. So Lex graduated from National Service Basic Training like a week ago. So they're having some time in a winter part of Australia in Perth. So it's really, really hot in Singapore at the moment, right, Joe? Have you been out lately? It's really hot. It's intensely hot. It's like June's going to average 35 degrees. So it's usually 28 to 32 all year round. So 35 is hot. So they're enjoying a bit of winter, which means I can watch some chick flicks. So I won't tell you everything I'm watching, but one I did watch was called The Starling, and it's Melissa McCarthy from Bridesmaid. She's hilarious, right? But this is actually a story about her and her husband, I can't remember his name, lost their daughter to SIDS, and it's how a relationship sort of goes through that. So I like watching complex. So Steve couldn't watch it because it was about a child dying, whereas I like watching healing stories, even though I know you're never going to get over it. I like that side of human nature, because to me that's where the real beauty exists. And then after listening to a podcast, I've started listening to the audiobook of The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Mm-hmm. So, Michael, have you come across that?
I haven't read the book, but I've heard of it, yes.
Yeah. I think I'm only just starting to get into audiobooks. I find it very difficult because I'm not a person that works with my hands. So it's hard for me to make the time to listen. But I think this is a really, really, really important subject that as parents we should be much more conscious of what's going on and the impact it's having. So The Anxious Generation, if you're into audiobooks, or buy the book. So there you go. So Michael, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been awesome.
I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah. and
we've enjoyed having you here.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank
and
you.
I think we absolutely should, like every quarter or so, because it's not where you are. You're not at a final point, right? It's just, it's constant evolution of thought. I've been putting together solutions in a different way for years, and it's always, every time I sit down, I look at it again, there's something new, or there's a deeper way of thinking about it, or there's a different path to take. So we'd love to have you back. Just let us know if you've got something that's important you want to share, or we could hone in on one of the topics that came up today that you guys want to discuss further. I mean, just having David here.
Firstly, it's a framework, and within that framework, there are going to be all kinds of development. So it's a way of helping see what's unfolding. And just a reminder, the mind map's available at 2030.michaelhaupt.com. I saw some people from LinkedIn putting comments in that maybe the link, as Andrea put it up, isn't working. So if you take out the www, just put 2030.
Oh, right. Sorry.
/class.
Carol's put it up. So it's on LinkedIn. There'll be a link. Yeah.
Great. And then in the mind map, it gives you access to all of the research database. So it's all there for anybody who'd like to take a self-paced journey through many, many rabbit holes. But I'd be delighted to come back more as a reflection of, okay, what happened since the last time we talked? How is this fitting in with the framework? Is the framework still standing the test of time? I think those may be interesting conversations to have.
I just hope
congratulations
we can do that
on your show. I think it's very timely, and well done on what you've put together.
Yeah,
I hope we can just continue doing it online and not in a cave. So
yeah, exactly. So we're sitting in the weak signals space. So which is
a good space to be in. Now we must amplify the weak signals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. So have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you for listening, and thanks so much. It's been awesome. Love the conversation. We'll see you guys.
Absolutely. Take care. Have a good weekend, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.